The army is like a patient bleeding out on the table in the operating theatre. If we can't stem that loss of blood, eventually the patient will die. This is really, really serious. I'm not crying wolf. I've been told this privately by very senior officers within the Ministry of Defence who can see what is happening.
In 10 years' time, the British Army will have only 50,000 soldiers. That is small enough to fit inside Manchester City's football stadium. The projections by the Times are based on the current rates of the loss, really, of army personnel, i.e. a recruitment crisis. European and American generals have now questioned whether the UK can still be considered a top-level fighting force. Mark Francois is a former Armed Forces Minister and a Conservative member of the Commons Defence Committee. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So is the UK still a top-level fighting force?
Yes, in terms of its capability on paper, but our greatest weakness now is not all the procurement disasters of the last 30 years, about which there have been legion reports. Our greatest weakness is people, because however much you spend on equipment, $1 billion for a destroyer, and so on, if you haven't got the skilled personnel to maintain it such that it can't go to sea, it's no good to you tied up against the harbour wall. And the context is, where we now are, is that for every one person that joins the British Armed Forces, 3 are leaving. And so we're haemorrhaging people, but it's worse than that, because a lot of the people we're losing are highly qualified and have taken years to train. And even the most mustard keen recruit, would take years to come up to speed. So in military jargon, we are hollowing out. And if we carry on at that rate, at that 3-to-1 ratio, within a few years, we will have operational failure, because we won't be able to operate our kit because we simply haven't got the skilled people to do it. This is the biggest challenge the Ministry of Defence faces, bar any other.
Wow. I mean, it is a stark message that you're conveying this morning, Mark. And with that in mind, ministers have agreed to reduce the army to 72,500 by 2025. And the Times observes that this is causing concern among senior US generals. And as we're reporting, there's concern that those numbers could actually drop below that based on the trajectory right now. So what we've got here is also our allies saying, well, hang on a second, now we're worried that you can't have our backs.
Well, by announcing this reduction in the army, which I've always opposed, we're sending all the wrong signals. And Larissa Brown, your defence editor, in a really excellent piece this morning, if I might say, says that, whatever the policy is on the numbers, if you just look at the rate that they're leaving voluntarily of their own accord, within 2 years, the army would be below 70,000. And then if you project that forward, by 2026, we'd be down to about 68,000, I think, by the end of that year. And then 10 years from now, we'd be down to 52,000, hence your comment that they could all fit into the Etihad Stadium. Let me make an analogy. Forgive me if it's a stark one, but that's where we are. The army is like a patient bleeding out on the table in the operating theatre. If we can't stem that loss of blood, eventually the patient will die. This is really, really serious. I'm not crying wolf. I've been told this privately by very senior officers within the Ministry of Defence who can see what is happening. Let me put it another way. If you're a skilled technician in the army and you leave, you could go and work for BA Systems or Thales or Leonardo. You won't necessarily double your money overnight, but you'll probably get half as much money again. You spend much more time with your family. No one can send you halfway around the world at 1 week's notice and you can't see your family for 6 months. And your family, who you love, won't have to live in substandard accommodation. And your kids won't have to have yet another cold shower because the MoD's contractors have failed to fix your broken boiler for 3 weeks. Now, this is the choice increasingly that army personnel are facing. they won't be treated like this anymore. And why should they? And they're voting with their feet. This is really serious. We have to grip this. And of course, we've got to improve the recruiting for the army. And if we want to do that, the first thing we could do is to sack Capita, who we outsourced it to, who has been a disaster.
Capita, yeah.
Yeah, well, they're affectionately known by that nickname by the Defence Committee.
Right, wow.
For good reason. But we need to improve recruiting. Of course we do. But unless we do something about retention, unless we stop the patient hemorrhaging, then we can never recruit our way out of trouble. So the first thing you need to do is to stop people leaving. And then when you've managed to stem the outflow, then you have to improve your recruitment, as it were, to make up the gap. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I follow you. And that's very clear, actually, and very helpful. I put it to you as well then, Mark, that there is a sort of difficult recent history with the British Armed Forces, is there not? That when it comes to sort of military action, whether it's around, for example, the 2013 Syria vote, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the UK's failed counterinsurgency campaign in Yemen in the 1960s, these are the sorts of things that do bad PR, damaging PR for the armed forces. Is it time that we kind of make our peace with the fact that we don't need to be that sort of military power anymore?
Well, look, I still think man for man, woman for woman, increasingly these days, we still have one of the best trained armies in the world. I believe that statement to be true. And at the end of the day, soldiers obey orders from democratically elected politicians. And so if there were problems with those campaigns, politicians have to take at least part of the blame. So we still have a highly capable army, but the problem is we're losing so many good, skilled, well-trained people who, in effect, it takes years to replace, even if you could recruit them in sufficient numbers. That's the fundamental problem. We had, Capita then, in front of the committee last week.
Right.
And in this year, in this recruiting year, they're 3/4 of the way through. They've only hit half the target. They estimate by the end of the year, they'll only get to 70%. So you're thousands of soldiers short. But it's worse because in key pinch point trades, people like what they called communication specialists, which I would have called signallers in old money, for those critical roles, they're barely recruiting 1 in 5 of those that we need for the reasons I've given. Because if you've come out of university, with a degree that means you could work in that area, the defence industry will offer you far more money and a much more comfortable life for you and your family. So those people are taking rational decisions and not joining the army. So we must stop them leaving, and we've also got to give people more reasons to join. This is really, really serious.
Yeah.
And I think, to be fair, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, who's a bright bloke, he now understands this, and we all want to know what he's going to do about it.
Fair. And I've just got a very final and quick point to put to you, and actually it's aided by a text from Phil. If you think the solution is to get rid of Capita, as is their real name, as you candidly called it with the extra R a moment ago, they were appointed by this government, I presume, by the Conservative government, and funding for the MoD has been cut. Why not just bin them? Why is it difficult to get rid of them? If they are the sticking point, bin them.
Phil, whoever you are, you're dead right. I've argued this for a long while. They simply aren't up to it. The army should take it back in house.
And why are they not doing that, though, Mark? What's the hold up?
Well, because the civil servants in the MoD won't admit they were wrong.
Right. Gosh. So that's a kind of institutional bureaucratic sticking point.
It kind of is. But look, I mean, just to end, at the risk of hammering the nail to split the wood to your listeners, this company have hardly ever hit their targets. There were a couple of years when they did, but that's because the army, shall we say, gave them a great deal of help. Let me put it that way. Now, this year, when we asked them for the latest figures, 3/4 of the way through the recruitment year, they've barely got half the recruits. And in terms of the key specialists, they've barely got 1 in 5. I think the actual precise figure from memory was 22%.
Okay.
That is a failing enterprise, and there's no point, pretending that it's working. The emperor has no clothes. These people are not good at their job. We've paid them over £1.1 billion down the years to fail, as Larissa again points out in her article. Einstein's definition of madness is if you carry on doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
Indeed.
Their system is broken. We should sack them and give it back to the army, who knew what they were doing in the first place.
Mark Francois, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Mark Francois, former Armed Forces Minister and a Conservative member of the Commons Defence Committee. Obviously, Capita are not here to respond to these claims from Mark Francois. However, they did say that a reset in 2018 resulted in the turnaround of army recruitment, claiming that it continued to modernise the recruitment process to make sure that the army has a pipeline of excellent soldiers and officers. So that's their comment. An MoD spokeswoman told The Times, while there are undoubted challenges to military recruitment, people are at the heart of the military, and the MoD is taking tangible and concrete steps to address shortfalls. More widely, the UK is spending more than £50 billion on defence this year.